Well, in the last video, I said I'd reserve some of my comments about women pushing men out of literature for later. It's now officially later, so without further delay.
He isn't talking about how publishing has been taken over by women and how women are preventing men from being published. None of that.
Well, okay, let's take a look at a few stats. I'm going to refer to the Lee and Lowe 2023 Diversity Baseline Study. The link will be in the description below. This graphic pretty much describes the breakdown of the publishing industry by race, gender, sexual orientation, and disability. And these are these stats broken down by their individual function within the publishing industry. The data for this study, as well as the studies that were done in 2015 and 2019, are pulled from 8 review journals and 34 publishers across North America. While the numbers have shifted slightly from 2015 to 2023, the results are essentially the same, even with the addition of new gender categories like non-binary, genderqueer, trans, and so on, and these weren't on the first report. The result across all 3 studies, however, is very clear. Women dominate the publishing industry up and down the board. And agents who are women? Well, that 78% tracks very closely to what I'm seeing in these literary agencies, and I'll discuss this in more detail later. The disparity between female and male literary agents is a definite indicator that men very well may be shut out of the publishing space. Why? Changes in the publishing industry have placed more reliance on agents to be filters and gatekeepers. This means that in order to impress an agent, you very well may have to make your story appeal to a female audience simply to get the agent interested. How so, you ask? Didn't you say that women are just as likely to read stories by men? Well, yeah. But when an agent says in their bio and in interviews that they have to, quote, fall in love with your story in order to champion it, and yes, that is a direct quote I've heard from several agents, it means that you have to appeal to the agent's personal preference of stories as opposed to what maybe can sell in the marketplace. When you start looking at factors like agent availability at the time you want to query, what an agent will represent, and that agent's personality and preferences, it leaves an author, any author, a narrow band of people to whom they can submit their manuscript. See how that works? You can't directly submit to a publisher anymore, so your only route is to deal with someone who accepts or rejects works based on their personal bias. A couple of years ago, many publishers would take direct submissions. Agents were far less prevalent. This I know through first-hand experience. Not so coincidentally, places like Bain, Atheon, Wargate, who all take direct submissions, tend to have a list that skews heavily male. Not only do they publish books that appeal to male readers, many of the books are written by male authors. Tor, another publisher who up until recently took direct submissions, had an authorship that is fairly equally divided between male and female. We'll see how long that lasts. But that's not conclusive proof of men being excluded from the traditional publishing sphere, right? Well, let's see what one renowned author has said. Not convinced? Sharmaine Lovegrove, founder of the Hatchet imprint Dialogue Books, said this about female dominance in the marketing and editing department of traditional publishers. It's a difficult thing. It's a thing that shouldn't be happening. We should be focused on inclusion, we should be focused on equality, and we should be publishing for the whole of society. It's really disappointing to see these stats of men not coming through, not just as novelists, but through the editorial process as well. Recently, Paul Burke at The Critic magazine highlighted the glaring gender imbalance by stating, "Such a huge gender imbalance in any industry, either way around, is unhealthy, and if men are assumed to not read much fiction anymore, then this may well be part of that explanation. For whereas a few years back there were plenty of male fiction writers, there are now vanishingly few. He also said the following: the industry once had a proud reputation of genuine equality. Men and women still have an equally illustrious history of writing fiction, but now the preponderance of women in publishing risks that natural equilibrium being destroyed. So it's not just me or John making this stuff up. People inside the industry are saying the very same things. To top this all off, I did my own research into many of the U.S. literary agencies in business today. I did a simple internet search and looked at the ratio of female authors and illustrators represented by those agencies and their male counterparts. I excluded those agencies that did not post their client lists, as well as those whose list was in the hundreds of names, or the sex of the client could not be easily determined. I stopped after my 12th agency. On average, the ratio of female to male clients ran roughly 80% to 20%. That's right, 80% of the authors represented by these agencies were female. The same proportion could be applied to the ratio of female to male agents. The larger agencies seem to be a bit more diverse superficially. If I had more time and if I was motivated enough, I would have gone through them with a fine-tooth comb as well. But I have books to write and produce, so maybe another time. So what we have are actual stats telling us that the publishing industry is dominated by women. We also have people inside the industry telling us that there has been a dynamic shift away from male writers. And I have my own research that verifies this imbalance with representation. So is it unreasonable to conclude that men are being edged out of the traditional publishing sphere? The answer is no. It's not an unreasonable conclusion. That was a rhetorical question. Now on to the next quote.
The biggest part of his argument, going back to something I said earlier, is this idea that he seems to imply that fantasy books written by male authors or that are centered on male characters should be given more space in an effort to attract and, bring more young men into reading. This, I think, kind of just fails the basic test of what book publishing is all about. And this is something he acknowledges, by the way. But the truth of the matter is, we can't look to corporations to do things that are, for the good of society. Corporations, big businesses do things that are good for them and for their stockholders.
Okay, not to be mean, but this comment is egregiously naive. Yes, in an ideal world, a business would work to maximize profits and pass them on to its shareholders. We don't live in an ideal world. As a guy who has worked in the corporate world for over 30 years, I can tell you that big businesses like major publishers are often driven by agendas. Personal agendas, political agendas, social agendas. These days it's expected, and in my opinion, this type of thinking has been disastrous for American businesses. Publishers are not exempt from this reality. New York City is, for all intents and purposes, the mothership of the publishing industry. A city and a culture that is rabidly progressive. It's run by a mindset that, despite women's dominance in the publishing sector, that women are underrepresented in this field, and that there is a gender bias in publishing. You don't need to go very far to find an article after article trumpeting this bias against women. But business is like cooking. Proof is in the pudding. Or cake, whatever. What have been the results of this newfound anti-male push? Well, the results haven't exactly been stellar. Bookstore sales have had a steady decline since 2008, and they still continue their downward trend. Book sales in general were down in 2022 and 2023. We saw a rebound in sales midway through 2024, but the file sales haven't been tallied for the current year, so we don't really know yet. Some people think this is a correction from 2021, and I don't have to tell you what happened in 2021, but book sales shot up dramatically during that time. However, declining readership year after year is not even debated at this point. There's an old Atlantic article that rang the warning klaxon on the decline of book readers back in 2014, noting that non-book readers had nearly tripled since 1978. All told, while the volume of books sold is way up across the decades, readership is, and always has been, steadily declining since the 1970s. But men have moved on to Netflix and video games, right? It's easy to blame the declining readership on games and streaming services. The reality is that many games and movies draw their stories and titles from books. The Lord of the Rings trilogy, most of the Tolkien stuff, has spawned 6 movies at least, cartoons, also video games. There's The Witcher, which has both a series on Netflix, or had a series on Netflix, and, of course, video games. There's Wheel of Time, Game of Thrones, Amityville Horror, Salem's Lot, Dune, and so on. Cripes, half of Hollywood's movies are based off of Philip K. Dick stories. I'm only partially joking about that. Books drive the rest of the entertainment industry. What publishers are chasing now are trends, and they've been doing it for a while. Right now, it's romantasy. Back when I was first trying to get published, it was chick lit. In 10 years, it'll be something else. Where they're making their money is with special hardcovers and painted edges, special editions, celebrity books, and appealing to women buyers who will collect multiple copies of the latest new thing. Gone are the days of the pulp novella or the pocket paperback, and if you look closely at John's bookstore videos, you'll see exactly what I'm saying. March 2024, I was sitting across to Barnes & Noble during a Comic-Con, an event where I literally sold out of stock not long after noon on the second day. I'm only half kidding when I say that in those 2 days, I probably sold more books than Barnes & Noble did. When I was in the Barnes & Noble, I saw virtually no one looking at books. There were kids looking at the manga and games, and everybody else was hanging out in the in-store cafe. None of this is a strong indicator of traditional publishing doing well. So pushing men out of the market hasn't exactly helped sales. And in my opinion, unless we start to bring in more younger readers, this downward trend will continue for some time. The solution, according to some feminist blowhards, men should just read A Court of Thorns and Roses or Fourth Wing. As my last video pointed out, that's highly unlikely to happen. The reality is self-publishing is beating up traditional publishing, taking its lunch money, and using it to buy cigarettes and booze. The hottest genre right now isn't romantasy, it's lit RPG. Lit RPG is almost entirely self-published and skews heavily male. It's in the realm of self-publishing because the geniuses in the traditional publishing sphere don't know what to do with it. And I'm not the only one saying this. Now, it may seem like I'm blaming women for the woes of the mainstream publishing industry. That's not true. What I'm blaming is the mindset and the agenda driving some of these decisions. The mindset that says that men just need to get used to women-focused fiction. That if you don't like Sarah J. Maas, you're some sort of misogynist. This is the same agenda that was at play when someone had the bright idea to make Dylan Mulvaney a spokesman for Bud Light. That too was an agenda-driven decision that nearly ruined that company. The big-brained executives didn't know or didn't care about appealing to the people who religiously lined up to buy their products. They decided to promote to people who didn't buy their products and probably never would. The people who buy it do so because it's cheap and they think it tastes good. The last part I can't really vouch for. I personally can't stand the stuff. It's not a product for the hip and trendy, and associating with a polarizing figure like Mulvaney was sure to elicit a hostile reaction from someone. And boy, did it ever. Now, one last comment before I wrap up this video. I've been attending a lot of in-person events lately. The majority of people purchasing my book, and I would estimate this at around 75%, fell into one of 2 categories. Young men and boys under the age of 40, women purchasing books for their male relations, nephews, sons, grandsons. With the latter group, there was one topic of discussion that came up quite frequently. There are no books out in bookstores for young men. There are no books like mine in the libraries, even though you can get my ebook and audiobook in many libraries at present. Some of them were educators, and they expressed a real concern that because of the types of books being offered to young boys were tuning out of reading. So this isn't me making this stuff up on the spot. There are people out there with a genuine concern that men are being turned off by what mainstream publishing produces. The simple solution is for people like me to self-publish, which is what I do now. However, just because you write a book and put it on Amazon, it doesn't mean it's going to sell thousands of copies. There is a significant amount of marketing promotion that needs to be done. Traditional publishers have the edge in this regard. They have the money, the distribution, and all the connections. They do indeed get priority. And some of the biggest bookstores, Barnes & Noble to be exact, will not offer shelf space for an indie author like me. It takes a staggeringly long time to build an audience if you ever build one at all. And now it's even harder knowing that, by the virtue of being male, you're shut out of an entire sector of publishing. That's all I'm going to cover in this video. I most likely will make a part 3. However, I have some things I need to attend to before then. I have a surgery coming up, and it's the holidays, so until next time, buy my book.